You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And as I've been speaking about recently, we are delighted to be offering our brand new creation, Waking the Wild Heart. This is the first course that Jonathan and I are co-leading in many years. And in hindsight, I can kind of see it's been like brewing in the background for all those years too. We didn't know that, but we can really see how our work has really brought us to this point where we're ready to offer it. And it is going to be so worth the wait. This is a journey into the wild, soulful depths of intimacy, love, and polarity. And it's for both individuals and couples. You are either already in a relationship and are ready to create more juicy, fulfilling, and loving intimacy with your partner, or you're currently single and are ready to create a relationship of this kind. Together, we will free you from the conditioning that's keeping you closed and awaken you to the wildness of your heart, empowering you to express your desire and passion and enable you to open as love. We can measure the extent we're living fully by how open our hearts are. Living fully is living with an open heart. Are you ready to live fully? We begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September, and enrollment is opening, finally, next week. There will be limited places, and I get the feeling they are going to be snapped up fast. We've already got quite a big interest list. So if you're feeling the call to join us for Waking the Wild Heart, go and register your interest now. And then as soon as we do open for enrollment next week, we will let you know and you can jump straight in and grab your place. The link for that is primalhappiness.co/WTWH, short for Waking the Wild Heart. And now into this week's show. It's my monthly show, All the Everything, where I jam on an eclectic mix of topics. And this is where you can get up close and personal with me, get inside my head, and you can see what I've been up to and thinking about. It also airs live on Facebook on the first Friday of every month at 2 p.m. UK time. In this episode, I dive deep into how to act on your soul purpose, including the lesson your soul came here for, what I call your one thing, i.e. the thing you came here to do, and walking your soul path. Does that sound juicy? Cool, let's jump in. Welcome to July's All the Everything. Welcome. And I have got a really, really juicy topic that we're going to dive deep into in a moment. As usual, this has been chosen by the wonderful members of the Primal Happiness Facebook group. If you're not already a member, really worth joining anyway, but you also will then get to choose whatever I'm going to talk about the next month. So I do a little poll, I suggest some topics, but members are also able to suggest something if there's, they'd rather me talk about something that's not been mentioned, and then you get to vote. And normally I choose the winning topic once I've chosen the one that came in second place. Normally I won't. Normally I'll go with whatever the the crowd decision was. So I'll dive into that in a moment. First, what I shall do is share what I've been up to over the last month. And as ever, I will do this through the lens of what I've been creating and what I've been consuming. And I completely forgot that's what I normally do. So I had to suddenly pause and try to remember seconds before I started. And then as ever, I'm usually reading several books at once, and I read a lot. So I get through a lot of books, and I do consume other things. I watch films, for example. I watch a little bit of television. And when things are not kind of closed as they currently are, I might go to the theatre or something. But the thing I always do is read. And I've just realised there's something else I could talk about in terms of consuming. I'm going to touch on that, actually. It's just popped into my mind that isn't a book. Anyway, the book that really stood out of the many books I've been reading in the last month was The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And I'm amazed I've never read this before. It's actually been sitting on my shelf. It was bought as a present. I think my husband bought it. And I think it was actually at my request at least a year ago, possibly longer. And it's one of those books that so many people recommend. People who tend to recommend books that I like have recommended it. And it's just sat there. And for some reason, I haven't read it. I think it might be partly because I tend to read most on my Kindle these days. And my books that I've got on my bookshelf, I think just become part of my surroundings. And I don't really see them. I think that might be also it. Well, for whatever reason, I suddenly glanced over. I was like, oh my goodness, I've never read The War of Art. I shall read it. And wow, if you're like me and it's a book you've always intended to read and haven't, go read it. It is just as wonderful as everyone says. It's also really easy read in that, although it's deep, it is really gorgeously deep, beautifully written. It's kind of typically a chapter per page. It's that kind of style of book. So you can kind of do it in bite-sized chunks. I quite liked, going for lunch and then reading a few of those pages and feeling like I'd really taken a lot from those. So if you are, and I suspect if you listen to this show, you are one of these people, but if you're someone who sees themselves as a creator, you don't have to be an artist as such, but if you create in some way, that could be you create in your business, it could be that you are a writer, it could be you are a painter, it could be any way that you bring yourself as an act of creation into the world, you will love it. He talks a lot about resistance, as in that resistance that shows up, that gets in the way of that act of creation. And he does it in such a, what's the word? A way that you can really relate to and resonate with. It's like, oh yes, I do that. Oh yes, that sounds familiar. It's one of those books where you just you feel like every page, it has been kind of taken from your mind and put into the pages. So if you haven't read that, go read it. I think you will love it. The other thing that just popped into my mind that I've been consuming that isn't a book is how could I describe it? It's kind of a course stroke Facebook group, or a Facebook group wrapped around a course all about the tarot. And it's by an amazing man called Luke Jamay, who has got a long history with the tarot, but actually kind of took a sort of sidestep and went into mentalism and sort of stage magicianship. Apologies if I'm using terms that aren't quite right for if you're in that industry. I'm hoping some of them are right. And then he then decided to really follow this pull to what he describes, and I love this, to real magic. And as I say, he'd actually had this long history with the tarot. I think he grew up with his mum and his aunts, I think he said, reading the tarot. So he actually had a long-lived relationship with it and then went back into it. And then this, I believe, this Facebook group and course that he's doing is the first thing he's done in this kind of public way all around tarot and teaching the tarot. And it is I was invited in to it by my friend John P. Morgan, who I've had on the show before as well. Amazing, amazing man. And he and his friend James Tripp, also a gorgeous man and a friend who has also been on the podcast, have been going through it together and then just really geeking out on all the things that they're noticing and discovering. And so John invited me in so I could kind of join them in that geeking out and discovery process. And oh my goodness, it is so magical. It's so magical. It really feels, when you're just on the sort of precipice of a new rabbit hole and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, this feels so timely. And it feels like it's a real path with heart. That's what this one feels to me. And interestingly, I'll share this actually. There's been some magic involved in me coming to this point that I'll share with you. So firstly, I'll share this part. My father was really, really into the tarot. So growing up, he always had tarot cards. I've actually inherited his deck of tarot cards. I've also inherited his kind of big A4 journal, I suppose, where he's written down his own notes and kind of discoveries about the tarot. And something I shared on Facebook the other day was I actually learned my left and right from the tarot. He'd painted, we were hippies, like my my family are hippies, so it will make more sense when I say what I'm about to say with that lens. He'd painted in our sitting room 2 full size, as in a floor to ceiling murals of the magician and the high priestess. And so they took up this whole wall of our sitting room pretty much. And I really struggled. I have a sort of, with certain things, I think I have a bit of a sort of issue processing them. And my left and right were one of those things. Even now I struggle. And I learned my left and right, knowing the magician was on the right and the high priestess was on the left. And for many years, and occasionally even now, I kind of bring them to my mind's eye. And then, oh yes, okay, so I know the magician's on the right, therefore that's the right. So I actually have quite a, I don't know what the word is, I suppose a sentimental link with the tarot because of that. And then I recently, and I haven't really had anything to do with it for many, many years. And then I was visited by a gorgeous, gorgeous dragonfly. I think the tail end of last week, I think it was. I've lost track of time. And I shared photos of this on Facebook, actually. If you haven't seen them, if you nip over to our group, you'll see it. It was absolutely stunning. A huge, huge, huge dragonfly. And one of my friends had spoken to someone he knows who knows about dragonflies, I guess, a dragonfly expert, and had said it was a female emperor dragonfly. And then from that, I was inspired. I was thinking, oh, right, so like an empress, actually. And then I was inspired to look up I don't really know why I was, but I was just inspired to kind of look up the meaning of empress. And the first thing that came up was a description of the meaning, I suppose, behind the tarot card of the Empress, which wasn't what I was looking for, by the way. I didn't even have the tarot in mind at the time. Anyway, this description was such a distillation of so much of my work and my vision and kind of what I commit to being and showing up as. And I was like, that's so interesting, the way that's kind of linked together. Anyway, so it felt so poignant to me. I actually took downloaded a photo of the Empress tarot card and set it as the wallpaper on my phone. And then a couple of days later, John Morgan, I mentioned, had posted about him doing this tarot group and then messaged me to invite me into it. And it was just like, this is so interesting. How has that happened? That I haven't really had any real dealings with the tarot for years. And just after I put a picture of a tarot card on my phone, days later, I'm invited into this group that's turned out to be the most beautiful, juicy, deep, rich thing I've come across in a while. So that's the background to this. I've ended up talking about this far more than I intended to, but as you can probably hear, I'm very excited about it. So I will likely share more about this, if not before, probably on the next All the Everything, because it does feel like an exploration that's going to keep on giving for quite some time. Okay, I think, oh no, I haven't even shared, my goodness, I've taken up most of the show so far just talking about what I've been consuming. So what have I been creating this month? And again, I was thinking, I can't think of anything I've been creating, even though I create constantly. And then realised the real big thing that I created in the last month was Unraveling the Body. So Unraveling the Body had started in May and then ran for 6 weeks. So it finished mid-June. And it was, and I think I may have shared some of this. No, I don't know if I have actually. I was about to say, I think I've shared some of this on a previous All the Everything. I actually don't think I have. It was such a revelation and a teaching for me in ways that I just wasn't expecting. The way it came about, me even doing Unraveling the Body was it wasn't at all planned out. It wasn't logical. It was just this sense of, there's women who, for whatever reason, haven't been able to join Waking the Wild Feminine. What if I could create something that was for them and also just for more women? Because Waking the Wild Feminine is limited to a maximum of 8 women. Just because of that, there's some women that can't get in. There's other reasons often too. So that was really the inspiration behind it. And then I posted and said, would anyone be interested in something like this? And immediately got back a clear yes. So this was back quite a few months ago. So I committed to doing it, put a date in the diary. And then I think in the meantime, I had the last Waking the Wild Feminine. So I wasn't even thinking about Unraveling the Body. It was just like one of those things that are just like, okay, that's what I'm doing. Won't really overthink it. It's going to happen then. And then it wasn't until really just before I started doing it. And then as I was doing it, I realized what an edge it was in so many ways that I probably now don't have time to go into. But there was definitely an edge involved in me working with a larger number of women at once. As I've just said, Waking the Wild Feminine is a maximum of 8 women. And Unraveling the Body ended up being 29 women. So quite a big difference, which meant even if not all of them ended up coming to a live call at once, usually there would be a significant number, often 20 plus, which felt like a lot to hold. It was a strange sensation of like, this feels like an edge and it feels perfectly natural and in alignment for me. So that was a really interesting thing to notice that. The other thing that really stood out to me was me being required to teach very specifically. In other things I've done, I've tended to pull away from that until it's really like requested of me. So, for example, with Waking the Wild Feminine, it's mostly focused around the circle. So women sharing of themselves. And then within that, I might coach or offer them a reflection, something that's going to help them sort of deepen into that experience of themselves. In the last Waking the Wild Feminine, I had taught a lot more, as in I was creating videos that would answer questions that were coming up for them. But in general, I have shied away from that. It's just something that just felt, I guess, less comfortable, less safe to me to kind of like, this is who I am, this is my message. I could be called a teacher. Even like the thought of being like naming myself as a teacher felt edgy, which is interesting because I actually come from a family of teachers. My father, grandma, and uncle, all on the same side, were teachers. So it's interesting that I guess is in my blood, and I've really shied away from that. And so the format of it, because it wasn't a circle, because the numbers of women required of me to teach. And again, that was one of those funny sensations where it really felt an edge. It definitely was driving up fear in me. And every time I was noticing, I was kind of like, and as I'm allowing myself to get into the flow of this feels really natural. It feels like what I'm here to do. So there was so much I took from that. And I was also really blown away by the depth the women involved were going to. I wasn't expecting that. I do expect it in Wake the Wild Feminine because of the format, because it's a circle. And again, I've seen it with my own eyes that this happens. I expect it to go deep. I was really surprised how deeply the women were entering into the practices and sharing of themselves into the group. I was really blown away by that. So I took so much from it. And it's something that we're now in, when I say we, Jonathan and I, we're now looking at what comes next with that. There is a possibility that we'll create some kind of video course, which would be lovely, because at the moment we don't have an offering for anyone who isn't, for whatever reason, ready, or we just don't have an offering available to join to work with us in one of our live programs. So it would be really lovely to have a kind of lighter step in this direction that doesn't have that kind of limited capacity. So we're looking at how we could make a video course out of it, which would be a really lovely thing to be able to offer. And I very much would like to do more of these things. So I suspect I'll be running another live version of Unraveling the Body at some point. It won't be until next year, like 2021, which sounds really weird to say, because before then we've got Waking the Wild Heart starting in September, and then the next Waking the Wild Feminine starting in November, which is going to go on for longer and go deeper than previously. So it won't be until 2021, but it definitely confirmed to me this is a medium that I love working in. So that won't be the last one. And if you're listening to this and joined me for Unraveling the Body, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It really was such a beautiful experience to be part of. And just such a pleasure. So thank you so much for joining me for that one. Okay, I'm going to take a drink of my lemon and ginger tea and then dive into the topic. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to check all of this is working as it should. I've lost trust in lives and Facebooks and stuff. Oh, thank you. I've just seen Kate has said it's working too. Thank you, Kate. Yep, all looks like it is working. Fabulous. Okay. This is also the first time I've recorded the making of all the everything on Facebook Live in an event. Which has probably added to all the complexity as well. It doesn't affect you if you're listening on the podcast, but if you're watching this live, it's added to the fun and games, I'm sure. Okay, right. So launching into the wonderful topic of how to act on your soul purpose. And yeah, does it get any bigger and deeper than that? I don't know. It's certainly not a small topic. And when I put it in as one of the options in the group, when I could see that was starting to rise to the top, I was like, well, it's no wonder, really. It's probably that underlying question that we all have, really, even if we're not totally conscious of it. So I will say at the outset, there's a common agreement that we need to have to even be able to have this conversation. And as ever, I'm never saying anything is like, this is the one truth and you must believe me. But we do need to have a kind of common agreement that where I'm speaking from and how I'm speaking to it is something that you're happy to, I guess, take on, even for the purposes of listening to this show, because without that, it's kind of pointless. So it's simply that in order to explore this, we need to be in agreement that we have a soul. You don't have to use that same languaging, but ultimately, there just needs to be a recognition that there is, as well as this idea that we are all connected, and even connected always sounds like a degree of separation that isn't actually what we're made of. There is this soup of consciousness that is we're all of. And there is this unique facet that each of us are, which I like to use the languaging of soul. You might like to use the word, I don't know, higher self, deeper self, something like that. But for the purposes of this conversation, if we can agree on the word soul, with the idea that, again, it's that drop that's part of that wider ocean, and it's the drop specifically that we're talking about when we talk about soul. And we also are going to need to have some agreement on the idea that that soul came here with some sense of purpose, some reason for coming here. And again, I'm not saying to you this is like absolutely like scientifically proven and here's the evidence. Like, you either, I guess, have a sense of this or don't. And I'm not using today's, if I ever do an episode on this, I don't even know if I would, but I'm certainly not going to be in this episode trying to convince or find evidence for that. It seems to me that we did come here with a reason, with a purpose. And it's so from that place that I'm going to be speaking to. So if you don't agree with either of those two things, or you're not even wanting to kind of enter into that context for the purpose of listening to this episode, this probably isn't the show for you. So maybe we'll catch up again next week. If you're in agreement that there could be some use to hold that context and explore from there, let's go. So this idea of coming here with a purpose or a destiny, I was pondering how to talk about this just before we started and realized there's probably more ways than this to talk about it, but there's probably 3 aspects of this that I'm going to touch on. And each of those 3 have, I guess, qualities or traits or ways experiences show up, but they're also really just like facets of the same thing too. So for just the purposes of being able to articulate them, I'm going to talk about 3 things. 1, that kind of lesson or the soul contract that we made in coming here. 2, what I'm going to describe as the one thing, this kind of like one thing that we feel we need to do before we die. And 3, this idea of a soul path. And it's probably already evident that, of course, they're all interlinked. And so I'm saying this at the outset because as I start to go into each of them, it's going to sound like they are separate, but it's with that understanding. They're all just facets of the same thing. But I think it might be quite useful to pull them apart and look at them for a moment individually. Okay, so the first thing is that idea of like, we came here to learn something. We made a contract and agreement to come here into this life, into this body at this time, and have this as a learning experience. And I think sometimes what can get in the way of us, I guess, it's not even recognizing that, but kind of like allowing ourselves to be in relationship with that, is we can, I see, almost like overblow that, think it needs to be something like big and world changing, like this kind of like, yes, the thing I agreed to come here to do, that contract I made was to solve world hunger or something of that kind. And I'm not going to say that's never the case, but my sense of it, having worked with lots and lots of people where we're talking about things of this kind, my sense of it is that kind of underlying lesson that we came here for is often much simpler. Doesn't mean it's easier, just to say, but it's often much simpler. And I'm saying all this again, this is just my sense of it. I could give you reasons I've come to this conclusion, but it's probably outside of the scope of the time and the medium we've got here. But my sense of this is these lessons tend to be much more around things like how we be in relationship, whether we are able to receive love, I guess, ultimately, if we really boil it down, but that could be love in the various ways that we show love on this planet. It could be to come back from adversity. They tend to be kind of like quite simply articulated things. It's not to say we always have this like real clarity, but I think the more we start to discover ourselves, see our wounds, see what's in shadow, start to bring that into light and integrate it, we start to get a sense of this is the theme that seems to underlie so much of what I'm traveling through, what I'm experiencing, where my blocks seem to come from, what I seem to struggle most with. We start to notice there is this common theme that runs underneath most things that we're experiencing. And so I'm saying that because, again, I think there is this sense in us, like that lesson, that agreement we made has to be something like dun, 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 that we could like spotlights on it, let's wheel it out. And it's often something really, really quite simple and subtle, but also really underpins whether we're able to show up open, whether we're able to like come here as the divine love that we actually are. So that's an invitation, first and foremost, to just start to notice, like, what are those common themes? What do you notice keeps getting in the way of you being able to open fully, radiate as this beautiful, unique being that you are? And then the next thing I would like us to look at. Oh, before that, I just want to read. I should have read this at the beginning when I was talking about soul, but it's such a gorgeous quote. Now I've just seen it. I just want to share it with you. It's Bill Plotkin, whose work is very much about this whole idea of soul. And I saw this quote earlier that he said, "Soul has been demoted to a new age spiritual fantasy or a missionary's booty, and nature has been treated at best as a postcard or vacation backdrop, or more commonly as a hardware store or refuse heap. Too many of us lack intimacy with the natural world and with our souls. And consequently, we are doing untold damage to both." And I meant to actually read that right at the start when I was talking about, like, let's at least agree for the purpose of this that we understand this idea of soul. And actually think now, maybe that was a good time for me to have like belatedly shared this, because I think, again, when we're either setting this idea that there is no soul, there is no reason, there's no purpose for us being here, or we think it could only be this like big grand purpose, we're missing that, what Bill Plotkin's describing is that intimacy with both the natural world and our souls. And often I notice they come as one, like the more intimacy we have with one, typically the more intimacy we'll also have with the other, as in the natural world and our souls. And when we lack that intimacy, we are doing untold damage to both. And what I would also say is that often then ripples out into everything, every way that we're being, every person that we come into contact with. So again, I think anything that allows us to start to live more from that place of, like, this doesn't have to be this big grand thing, just to start to live with a recognition of possibly there is a soul, possibly it came here to learn. And what could that be? And how about if I just like honor that with that sense of, again, like gentle, sort of quiet inquiry? What could that create? Okay, so now moving on, the next thing I'm going to say is going to sound like in direct contradiction to what I just said. I love that. I love a paradox, which is this idea of what I've been calling lately the one thing. So what I've been noticing is many of us, and certainly many of the people that come to work with me, have this often a secret, heartfelt calling, sense of this thing, this one thing that they have to do before they die. And what I also notice about this is when they do share this, when they speak this out, there's a real motion that comes with it. It's like that important to them. It's like hard to talk about without it also sort of like sparking tears in their eyes. And the interesting thing, although that sounds like another like big grand thing, often these things aren't necessarily big, like huge grand things, relatively speaking, compared to the other things they're doing. So it just is like one of those unexplainable. I don't even know why this is my one thing, but I have this real sense. And again, we can feel this. It isn't a logical sense. It's a real heartfelt, emotion-laden sense of this is something that's really important for me to do. And mine, for example, is having written and published a book. And I can feel already like the emotion that I have around this, that if I get to the end of my life and I haven't done that, that's, I dread to think, the grief I can already feel of like, if I did get to the end of my life and hadn't, that would be hard to bear. And I'm going to share more about something related to this in a moment when I talk about our soul path. But the thing I notice is we can be doing other things that feel really soul aligned, like, for example, me doing the work I do feels completely soul aligned. And it doesn't change the fact that writing and publishing a book is still my one thing. And so what I notice is that will show up in all sorts of different ways for different people, where they could be doing something, again, really beautifully soul aligned. And yet there is this one thing, and sometimes they're related, sometimes they're not, that they have this sense of like, if I get to the end of my life and haven't done that, that would feel almost like the biggest regret I can imagine, or I didn't really do what I came here to do. So the reason I think this is really helpful to talk about is often because of the level of kind of like high stakes this brings, because it's, again, like, do you get much higher stakes than that? Like, if I get to the end of my life and I haven't done this would be like just the biggest regret. We don't often talk about this. It's painful to talk about. I don't know if I've ever shared that about me writing a book on the show before. So firstly, we often don't share that with other people. The other thing is, it's, again, because of the like level of high stakes it brings, it's also, I guess, like anything like that has that degree of possibility for us. Like, oh my goodness, this means all of this to me. It has so much possibility for me. It's also a huge risk. Like, what if I try and don't manage to do it? Or what if I do it and it's not as good as I wanted? Or what if I do it and then I end up being told it was terrible? And so we'll all have our own version of that. But that's what I noticed, like the stakes are so much higher for our version of the one thing. I see other coaches, I'm going to say churning out books. I don't mean that in a derogatory fashion, as in they're just all churning out books and they're good, but seeming to like just write book after book after book with no real thinking about it. And I look and think, how is that even possible? And I've only really, if I'm honest, quite recently realized it's because probably that wasn't their one thing. It could even be what I'm doing in terms of being able to really do work that feels deeply aligned with who I am and my gifts is their version of that. Like for them, writing a book is just like, yeah, it feels aligned. Yes, they love doing it, but it wasn't the thing for them that was the big deal. It might be for them doing what I'm doing is their one thing. And so, the reason I'm sharing this is just really highlight that, firstly, just the fact that you don't hear people talking about it, I think is for all the reasons I'm saying here. The second thing is to, as much as you can, hold this with like a sense, like a velvet box around it, like it isn't something to compare. It isn't something to kind of bring out into the harsh light of day and like, well, why have I got so much thinking about this when everyone else seems to find this easy? Like, it's not meant to be easy for us when it means that much to us. It doesn't mean it's impossible. Doesn't mean there aren't ways that we can make that more possible. But I just really want to name that's often what I see shows up. It means so much to us. It actually makes it harder. Okay. I'm hoping I'm going to kind of tie all these up into like a nice, neat bow at the end. Let's hope. Okay. The next thing is our soul path. And this is something that I don't believe we have this kind of like predestined, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It's much more of a something we'll have sovereign choice over, how we live, the choices we make. I think there are some elements of that may well be predestined, like going back to what we said at the beginning, that soul contract. I tend to think that we do make a contract with other souls to show up in our lives at certain times. I think even, for example, I felt that very much that way about some of my coaches and teachers. And I know some of my clients say that about me coming into their life. I think there's certain people where we can say, I can absolutely see that this just felt so right, so destined. And I can see now in hindsight that was instrumental to then what came next. So I think there are elements of that, but I do also think that we have a sovereign choice about how we actually walk that path. And my sense of it is the more we are able to rewild ourselves and live from that soulful place, which I haven't got time to really go into now, but most of the lives that I've done, all the everything shows I've done, I've probably touched on this over and over again, like ways that we can start to listen to ourselves, ways that we can start to be more in relationship to our souls. But from there, we are inevitably, I believe, the more we are able to listen, like what's in alignment for me, what is living from soul, what would that look like? What would that look like? We naturally are going to be walking in the direction of, firstly, moving in the direction of, I guess, growing into that lesson that we came here for. And secondly, into creating that one thing that I mentioned. And so I think in a way, if we're going to put our attention anywhere, it comes back to living from soul, trusting that if that's where I'm being guided from, if I keep looking into like, what's here for me, trusting that will naturally unfold into the other two things. So as you can probably hear, there is a reason why I said these are all just facets of ultimately the same thing. But if we want to place our attention anywhere, it really is all coming from that foundation of living in a soul-led way. Right, I'm just going to take a breather, and then I've got a couple of final places that I think might be helpful to look at. Okay. So this links actually to another topic that I know keeps coming up with our Facebook group members. And it relates to a post I wrote a month or two ago that's sort of become affectionately known as Raven. And it was to do with magical women being able to make money from what they do. And I will do something about that, either an all the everything, or I might do a Facebook Live into the group on that. And I haven't got time to really go into this now, but one of the things I often see show up is this sense that if we aren't able to make money from that kind of like soul, that one thing, that thing that I have come here to do, that I must do before I die, if I'm not doing it and not making money from it, I'm failing at it. And my sense of it is more and more that's not necessarily a helpful way to measure kind of like success or failure. I actually think it adds an extra level of pressure into something that's already really high stakes. That's not to say we can't make money, make a living from living from soul. I believe we absolutely can. But I think the more we're really focusing on, I need to be doing this, and that also needs to be the thing that brings me in money, that can put so much pressure on something, it makes it unhelpful. There's a quote that one of the women actually was on Unraveling the Body that read Soulcraft, one of the books that I always recommend. She shared this quote with me, and it's actually Bill Plotkin, the author of Soulcraft, who quoted this other chap who I don't know, but it's an amazing quote, so I'll share it with you anyway. The chap's called Frederick Buechner. I may be mispronouncing that. And the The quote is, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." I love that. So the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And of course, in our culture, we are so trained to measure everything through this lens of, is it going to bring in money? What's the monetary value of this? And I actually think it's really helpful to come back to that idea of like the world's deep hunger. It might be that world's deep hunger isn't measured in money. And maybe that could be okay. Maybe if we stop placing all the attention on money, it could be that actually you are going to, but that's not the place to put the attention. Or it could be that you doing your one thing is important. It is something that is going to meet the world's deep hunger. And yet there's something else that you're going to make a living from. And I think bringing that degree of lightness to it, not making this have to be the way you make a living, the way you keep a roof over your head and feed yourself. I think looking at it from there is often really helpful, to not make this the thing. Again, there are some distinctions here that I really will, when I do the live or the all the everything, all about that idea of kind of magical women and money, I'll make some further distinctions around that. But I think, again, just through this lens of, and again, this is not saying we absolutely can't make money from living a soul-led life. I actually find like if at the very simplest level, I actually think that is ultimately like just the most gorgeous way to live, and inevitably seems to work out from a financial perspective too. So I would say take the one thing out of it, but certainly living a soul-led life, it seems to mean that we are just absolutely taken care of. So that's the one thing I will leave you with on that. The last thing I really want to leave you with is the idea that it sounds so like easy and effortless and flowing to say, yeah, okay, all I need to do now is live from soul and that takes care of it. Yes, and it's hard. That's the thing I see over and over and again. And when we go back to, again, this lesson that we came here to learn, I guess it's supposed to be. We will be tested. That's how we learn. And I see over and over again in my own life and in those of my clients that those tests hardly ever come the way we expected them to come, when we expected them to come, and the kind of like the size that we expected to come in. I often notice that we think like, oh, I was expected to be tested, but not like this, not to this extent. And the one thing I do notice though is that we say that from a place of like, I'm not able to be with this, like this is beyond my capacity. And yet my sense of it is we never are tested beyond our capacity. We do endure. There's a gorgeous, gorgeous prayer that my friend, Clarissa Pinkola-Estes, I wish she was my friend. She's my friend in my imagination, maybe one day in actuality. There's a beautiful prayer that she wrote that I'm going to share with you as a kind of closing of all of this, because I just think, again, this is the most beautiful way to live, is from soul, walking our path, knowing that's going to allow us to act on our purpose. And it's flipping hard. We will be tested. So I'm going to leave you with this. Refuse to fall down. If you cannot refuse to fall down, refuse to stay down. If you cannot refuse to stay down, lift your heart toward heaven and like a hungry beggar, ask that it be filled. You may be pushed down. You may be kept from rising. But no one can keep you from lifting your heart toward heaven, only you. It is in the middle of mystery. Oh my goodness, sorry, I've messed that up. It's in the middle of misery that so much becomes clear. The one who says nothing good came of this is not yet listening. Oh, I love that so much. So that's that for me. It's really only a kind of like tiny little step in the direction of like this enormous topic, but hopefully it gave you one next breadcrumb, which I always come back to, this idea that as we start to walk this path of soul, all we need is the next breadcrumb to follow. So, and that's always unique. That's always different for anyone. So I can't specifically say to you, like, this is your breadcrumb, but I'm going to trust that you heard something in what I've shared that was your breadcrumb. I really hope you'll walk in the direction of it. Okay. What do I need to share with you before we close? I've not even mentioned yet. I did briefly mention it, I think. Jonathan and I are launching Waking the Wild Heart very soon. It's our brand new program co-led by both of us, which is the first time we've done that for years. And it's for both individuals and couples. And it is going to be, oh my goodness, just gorgeous. It's about polarity, intimacy, and love. It's going to be both really deep and as deep as you can get. Ultimately, how do we open and live as divine love? And it's also going to be really practical. We are going to get into some amazing practices, both as a group and that people can also take away and do as individuals. It is going to be everything we know and live on those topics. We are just going to give it all to you. So it is going to be something very, very special. There's already quite a big interest list and the numbers are limited. I've got a terrible head for numbers and I can't even remember what the limit was. But we are likely to sell out. I know that for sure. So if you want to, we're going to open enrollment in the next week or two. We're actually a bit late in doing that as well. We've been so busy. So it will open very soon for enrollment. So you can then go and pay and book your space. If you already know that is going to be for you, go register your interest at primalhappiness.co/WTWH, short for Waking the Wild Heart. Register your interest, and then as soon as it does open for enrollment, we will let you know, and then you can jump in and make sure you get the space that's yours. What else? If you're not already a member of our gorgeous Facebook group, I've mentioned that several times actually, come join us. It's a beautiful place to meet like-minded wild souls, and that's at facebook.com/group/primal happiness. It's completely free. So come join us. And also if you are watching this live and you don't usually listen to our weekly podcast, which this ultimately goes out on, come do so. It's free again, and that's at primalhappiness.co/ my brain's just gone blank. Podcast. I'll say that again. primalhappiness.co/podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been fun. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend if you're watching this live and it's Friday, and lots of love. Mwah. Bye-bye. So that's all for this month. I would love to know what you took from this show. Will you be acting on your soul purpose? And if you'd like to share what came up for you, then come join us in the Primal Happiness Facebook group and share what's coming up. The link for that is facebook.com/group/primal happiness. And I would love to have your feedback, questions, and also topic suggestions. And you can vote in the group on the next show. And the group is also the right place to go post those too. And if you want to join me live for the next show, I would love that. You'd be very welcome. If you like our Facebook page, facebook.com/primal happiness, there'll be an event created there that you can add to your diary. And also you can just watch out for the show airing live the first Friday of every month at 2 p.m. GMT. No, BST at the moment, UK time. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything I spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 287. And if you want to be one of the first to know when we open Waking the Wild Heart for enrollment next week, go register your interest now at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. if you don't want to miss our next week's episode. And oh my goodness, we have got some gorgeous episodes stashed in the bag right now. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode straight to your device as if by magic as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.